and in fact, I had to take Sam aside a couple of times because he was saying, look, what are the academics going to say? How can I get around the academic attacks and so on? And I said, look, they're going to say what they're going to say. That you can't write or operate with that as your controlling factor. And of course the prevailing wisdom, which is of course is what Gavin is talking about, I think, with regard to Columbus, the prevailing wisdom was that Drake had discovered San Francisco and that he'd only visited that part of North America and so on. And of course, it was completely untrue. And it was part of the difficulty of what was, of course, that they were ignoring the historical fact that Queen Elizabeth had specifically sworn Drake to secrecy about what he had done, and that's in the historic record. He was actually looking for the Northwest Passage from the western side of North America, and this was part of Elizabeth's larger geopolitical strategy. But Sam's experience with the academics, and then, of course, once he published his book, they're trivializing of it, and all you have to do is go and look at the reviews of it. I mean, they're specious and nasty because, of course, people are preserving their academic turf rather than developing the full and human history that is out there. And I couldn't agree with more with Gavin, except that I would argue that his experience is part of a much larger problem.
So, Tim, what's the answer? There must be many people who think like you and I out there. How can one harness their energies?
Well, I think that one of the things that I always do, and I think that what you've tried to do, is you and I mentioned the problem of specialization.
Yes.
Is you must constantly look at everything in the larger context. Now, what's happened in academia is there's two things. One is that the growth of specialization to the point where to generalize, that is, to put things in a larger context, is unacceptable. And the dictum has become to generalize is the mark of a fool, to specialize is the mark of genius, when in fact history is generalization.
Yes.
And I presented this argument, Gavin, in the context of that geography is the stage and history is the play that's played out on that stage. Yes, you can study them independently, but you really don't start to understand them unless you put them together.
Yeah.
So that's one of the problems. The other problem is that the academic world has very, very narrowly defined intelligence, and so it excludes common sense, wider perspectives. And by the way, that specialization has virtually destroyed history as a discipline. I remember talking about the weather conditions when Cardinal Richelieu was in power to a guy who'd done his doctoral thesis on Richelieu. He knew nothing about what was going on around Richelieu. He just looked at the man, in an absolute vacuum. And this is part of the problem. So when you come along and say, well, look, you can't take what was going on in that particular year out of the larger context, then immediately you then are attacked by all these specialists whose own particular very, very narrow tunnel vision view is against what actually happens.
Yes.
Gentlemen, I want to read something to you. The University of Texas at Austin. They have a website, and their byline is, "What starts here changes the world." Now, I love Texas. I love Austin. I love Betty Sue Flowers, who used to teach there. But I want to tell you how pervasive the spin of translation is about peer review. It says peer-reviewed journals. It's a paragraph. It says, what does peer-reviewed or referred mean? Peer review is a process that journals use to ensure the articles they publish represent the best scholarship currently available. When an article is submitted to a peer-reviewed journal, the editors send it out to other scholars in the same field, the author's peers, to get their opinion on the quality of the scholarship, its relevance to the field, its appropriateness for the journal. Publications that don't use peer review, and they cite Time, Cosmo, and Salon, Just rely on the judgment of the editors, whether an article is up to snuff or not. That's why you can't count on them for solid scientific scholarship.
Well, if I may comment from an amateur historian's point of view, I think they completely ignore the immense trouble that publishers take to ensure that what their authors write is accurate. When I wrote 1421, there were no less than 12 internal reviews of what I'd written by different editors within Transworld to make sure that everything was as accurate and as well checked as it could be. And the same was my second book, 1434, with HarperCollins, exactly the same. So publishers really do take a tremendous amount of trouble to cross-check what authors have said, so they don't print nonsense. So I absolutely disagree with what that article you've just read said about ensuring accuracy. It ensures straitjacket, really.
I didn't agree with what was written, but I wanted you both to know how pervasive the falsity about what it is in its tremendous high regard as a process for establishing, quote, credibility.
Yes.
And that it's not a mature instrument for the establishment of credibility. It's going to be as low level as the people evaluating and reviewing what's being presented to them.
Well, Kim, I totally agree with Gavin about the role of editors and their checking of the facts and going to people with anything that's published. A good editor is absolutely essential to any publication. But beyond that, that definition of peer review, of course, is self-serving because it's prepared by an academic community.
Absolutely agree.
Right, and so you end up with what I called many years ago peer review censorship. Now that works in several ways. One is, of course, that if you're the editor of a journal, even if it's very, very narrow in its focus, say something like the Journal of Sedimentary Petrology, you as editor are going to get an article and you're going to say, well, who are the experts? And of course the experts are those that are dominant in the prevailing wisdom. And unfortunately nowadays the ones that are getting the most funding. And so you send it to them. They, of course, are going to look at it and decide, and I use these terms deliberately, whether it is heresy or not. If they consider it heresy, that is, that it doesn't support their view, then they're going to recommend that it not be published. And, of course, what that does is predicate against the very idea of scholarship, of wider views and different views and different perspectives on things. And, of course, we saw how easily that approach was perverted because of putting people in place as editors who were going to select the reviewers that were wanted. Right? And also, we saw the case with the Climatic Research Unit where one editor dared to publish an article that questioned what was being said, and they actually got the editor fired. And so when you look at how the system was used and corrupted by these people, it underscores all of the serious limitations of this very narrow, incestuous idea of peer review. And what's also interesting, by the way, Kim, is that in the Wegman report that looked at the infamous hockey stick, which was at the key or at the center of the thing, it was a statistician who picked up on the problems. It wasn't even a climate scientist. He happened to be at a conference where this graph was put up, and because of his expertise in graphing and statistical procedures, immediately knew that this had been falsified. And yet that article had been peer-reviewed by other people, the other experts in that particular area. And of course, the fact that it was somebody from a completely different specialization shows how this has seriously affected research, knowledge, and understanding.
Yes. Have you any ideas, Tim, how the system's going to be changed, or do you think it'll just carry on as it is?
Well, unfortunately, it's going to carry on as it is.